The restaurant glowed with golden light, the kind that made crystal glasses sparkle like tiny jewels. Laughter floated above the clinking of silverware, blending with the soft hum of live piano music in the corner. I sat beside Michael, my hand folded neatly in my lap, watching him beam as he told yet another story about his promotion. His voice carried that blend of confidence and charm that always seemed to draw people in. Around the table, I saw smiles, nods, raised glasses. Everyone seemed dazzled by him. Michael leaned closer, slipping his arm behind my chair, as if to put me on display too. "I couldn't have done it without Stacy," he announced proudly, his grin as polished as the silverware in front of us. The table erupted in agreement, voices overlapping in admiration. I smiled, because that's what was expected of me, though inside there was a flicker. That quiet whisper of doubt I had shoved deep down. It sat there like a secret I carried alone, folded tight and tucked away. Tonight, though, I promised myself I'd ignore it. The air was thick with the smell of roasted garlic and aged wine, a richness that clung to the room. Waiters glided between tables, their trays balanced with grace, refilling glasses and laying out plates as if choreographed. I tried to soak it all in: the glow of the chandeliers, the warmth of laughter, the hum of a night that felt celebratory. Straightening my back, I reminded myself I belonged here, in this glow. Whatever suspicions haunted me before, tonight, I wanted to believe Michael's charm wasn't just a mask. I wanted to trust him. I needed to. I lifted my glass when the others did, the chilled rim brushing my lips as I joined their toast. The wine tasted smooth, a little sweet at first, then sharp as it settled on my tongue. Across the table, one of Michael's colleagues leaned forward, laughing loudly at something he said. I watched Michael soak it all in, the attention, the admiration. He thrived on it. I couldn't help but notice how easily he played the part of the golden man, the one who had it all. And for a moment, I let myself believe maybe that was true. As the conversation flowed, my gaze drifted around the room. Couples leaned in close over flickering candles. Waiters carried plates that smelled of seared steak and truffle, and the clinking of glasses created a rhythm all its own. I tried to memorize the feeling, to press it into memory like a photograph. The warmth of the night, the easy laughter, the illusion of stability. It felt safe. It felt like happiness should feel. And yet, beneath that comfort, a knot in my chest refused to unravel. Michael's hand brushed mine under the table, and I forced myself to squeeze it gently, pretending the gesture grounded me. He smiled, flashing the same confidence he'd worn all evening. I returned it with my own, but mine felt different. Stretched, thin, like a mask I wore to match his. I told myself not to overthink it, not to let old suspicions steal this night from me. I wanted so badly to trust the man sitting beside me. Maybe if I just kept smiling, I could convince myself I already did. The waiter placed a plate in front of me, tender lamb resting on a bed of creamy potatoes, steam rising like a whisper of comfort. I thanked him softly, though my attention was pulled back to the table's energy. Michael was in his element, raising his glass again, making everyone laugh with another one of his perfectly timed remarks. I watched him, the way his eyes sparkled under the golden lights, and I wondered if maybe I was the one being too guarded. Maybe love required letting go of suspicion, at least for one night. I reached for my fork, trying to steady my thoughts with something ordinary. The flavors burst as I took a bite. Savory, rich, almost grounding. Around me, voices overlapped in cheerful noise. Old friends sharing inside jokes, colleagues trading stories about work. I joined in, laughed when I was supposed to, nodded when expected. It was a performance I knew well, one I played alongside Michael, like we were two actors on the same stage. For everyone else, we looked flawless. And part of me wished that was real. As dessert menus appeared and more bottles of wine were opened, I leaned back in my chair, soaking in the glow of the evening. For a fleeting moment, I let myself exhale, telling my heart it was safe to believe again. Maybe the night could be exactly what it seemed, a celebration, nothing more. I didn't know then that the illusion was seconds away from cracking, that one small vibration against polished wood would change everything I thought I knew about Michael. The laughter was still rippling around the table when I heard it, that sharp, familiar buzz against the polished wood. Michael's phone lit up, its glow slicing through the dim candlelight. He reached for it casually, as if it were nothing, but I was right beside him. My eyes caught the screen before he tilted it away. Just one line. One line that made my breath hitch in my throat. "Good night, love. Too bad you're not here with me." For a second, I felt my chest tighten so fiercely it was like someone had stolen all the air from the room. I forced my lips into a smile, nodding at whatever joke someone across the table had just made. My hand didn't shake, though my heart pounded so loudly I was afraid others might hear it. That single message replayed in my mind like a cruel echo, each word burning hotter than the last. The clinking glasses around me suddenly sounded distant, as if I were underwater. Michael slid the phone back into his pocket without a thought, still wearing that easy grin. Meanwhile, I sipped my wine slowly, using the glass to hide my expression. On the surface, I was composed, laughing at the right moments, keeping my posture steady. But inside, something shifted. A quiet storm gathered, fierce and certain. I memorized everything, the sender's name, the exact words, the way his eyes never even flickered with guilt. In that moment, the seed of my revenge was planted, and I knew I'd let it grow. I let my eyes drift across the table, pretending to be engaged in the conversation. But inside, I was replaying the message like a song stuck on repeat. "Good night, love." Who was she? Where was she? The sweetness of those words wasn't meant for me, and that knowledge stung sharper than any insult. I glanced at Michael's hand as it gestured confidently in the air, as if nothing in his world was out of place. And in that moment, I realized he truly believed I would never know. I excused myself for a moment, slipping away to the ladies' room, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Inside the mirror's reflection, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My lipstick was flawless, my hair pinned neatly, my dress hugging me just right, yet my eyes carried the weight of betrayal. I steadied my breathing, pressing cold water to my wrists as if I could wash away the fire beneath my skin. I wouldn't give in to tears, not here, not tonight. When I returned, I sat down as though nothing had happened. My laughter was softer now, my voice controlled, but no one seemed to notice the difference. Michael carried on, thriving under the spotlight of admiration, completely blind to the storm brewing inches away from him. And I decided then, I wouldn't confront him here. No raised voices, no scene, no chaos. That would be too easy for him. No. I'd wait, I'd plan, and when the time was right, the truth would unravel on my terms. The rest of the evening blurred, though I played my part flawlessly. I smiled when Michael touched my hand. I laughed when his colleagues praised him, and I raised my glass when the next toast circled the table. To anyone watching, we were the perfect couple, locked in our golden glow. But inside, I was taking notes, every detail etched into memory. The exact curve of his smirk, the time the message came through, the ease with which he hid it from the room. I studied him like a stranger that night, peeling back layers I had once trusted. His charm now looked rehearsed, his laughter too polished, his pride nothing more than a shield. How many nights had I ignored signs like this? How many whispers had I silenced just to keep the illusion intact? The thought burned, but it also sharpened something in me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't broken. I was just beginning to wake up. As coffee was served and the night drew to its polite close, I slipped my coat over my shoulders, leaning into Michael's arm as if nothing had changed. But in my mind, the path ahead had already shifted. I wasn't going to confront him with anger. I wasn't going to crumble into tears. Instead, I would wait. I would gather, and I would strike when the stage was mine. The performance he loved so much was about to turn against him, and he'd never see it coming. The morning after that dinner, Michael showered while I sat at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of coffee I barely tasted. Steam curled into the air, but my thoughts were colder, sharper. When I heard the water running upstairs, I moved quietly, almost on instinct, toward his phone left charging on the counter. My pulse hammered as I unlocked it with ease. The same password he once told me proudly I'd never forget. And there it was. A string of messages, each one a dagger dressed in sweetness, confirming everything that text at dinner had already screamed. Her name glowed across the screen, paired with words I had once believed were mine alone. Promises of stolen nights, whispered complaints about me, even his ridiculous excuses for not being with her. My hands didn't shake, though. I saved every screenshot with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. I wasn't the woman who would scream and throw dishes. No. I would be the woman who built a case, quietly and thoroughly, until his own lies crushed him. When Michael came downstairs, towel around his neck, flashing me that easy grin, I slid his phone back into place and smiled right along with him. He kissed my cheek, oblivious, while my mind raced ahead. Already, I was thinking about the dinner I'd host, the guest list, the timing. He would walk straight into it believing it was his celebration, his moment of glory, and that's what would make it perfect. Because nothing cuts deeper than betrayal exposed under the same spotlight he adored so much. The days that followed felt like walking through a play I no longer believed in. Michael went on with his routines, work calls, gym visits, late nights spent catching up. I played the devoted wife, smiling in the right moments, asking the right questions, slipping into bed beside him as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was collecting pieces of a puzzle. Every message, every detail, I stored carefully, building the story he thought he had buried. Each new discovery wasn't just proof, it was fuel. I knew better than to confront him alone. Anger behind closed doors would only give him the chance to twist, to deny, to gaslight me into questioning myself. No, if Michael had thrived on image and performance, then his downfall had to happen on the same stage. That thought gave me clarity, even peace, as I began planning. I made lists, drafted invitations, and chose the perfect night. The kind of night where friends, family, and colleagues would all gather, unaware they were about to watch a curtain fall. In quiet moments, I wondered why I wasn't crying. Shouldn't betrayal break me into pieces? But instead, I felt something steadier, stronger, like steel forming in fire. The pain was there, yes, but it had transformed into resolve. Maybe it was years of giving, years of forgiving small things I shouldn't have. Or maybe I'd simply had enough. Whatever the reason, I wasn't crumbling this time. I was building. And Michael had no idea that every smile I gave him was just another brick in the trap I was setting. When the invitations were sent, Michael lit up like a child on Christmas morning. He wrapped his arms around me, kissed my forehead, and thanked me for always supporting his career. I almost laughed at the irony, but instead I hugged him back, whispering that he deserved every bit of this celebration. He never questioned it. Not once. To him, I was the doting wife, the woman who would never dare betray his trust. And that blind confidence was exactly what made him so easy to fool. I planned every detail with care, the menu, the wine, the seating chart. I made sure his parents would sit close, that his colleagues would all be in view, that the atmosphere would feel warm, inviting, safe. The kind of setting where masks slip, where truth lands harder because no one is prepared for it. While I ordered flowers and arranged table settings, I could almost see it already. The shock, the whispers, the silence that would follow once I revealed everything. The thought alone steadied me more than any prayer could. On the surface, life carried on untouched. Michael strutted through the days, proud of his promotion, oblivious to the storm brewing under his own roof. And I carried myself like a woman in love, cooking his favorite meals, laughing at his stories, touching his arm in public. To him, it was proof of loyalty. To me, it was camouflage. Every smile I gave him was a step closer to the moment when the truth would finally strip him bare. And that night was coming sooner than he could ever imagine. The night of the dinner arrived, and my home buzzed with voices, the air carrying the rich scent of roasted meats and clinking glasses. Michael stood at the center of it all, greeting his parents, shaking hands with his colleagues, flashing that familiar grin that always won him admiration. I moved through the room with practiced grace, pouring wine, offering smiles, making sure everyone felt comfortable. To them, I was the proud wife hosting a celebration of her husband's success. To me, I was setting the stage for his fall. I studied Michael as he charmed the room, every gesture polished, every laugh just loud enough to pull attention. He loved being adored, and tonight was no different. He didn't notice how closely I watched him, or how steady my smile was despite the storm I was hiding. My heart didn't race like I thought it would. Instead, I felt calm, almost cold, like an actress waiting for her cue. And when the moment came, I'd know it. I had rehearsed it in my mind 100 times. As the last plates were cleared and the laughter mellowed into softer conversations, I stood, a glass of wine in hand. The chatter faded almost naturally, as if the room sensed a toast was about to be made. Michael looked up at me with pride, expecting I'd say something sweet, something about him and his hard work. And I did smile. I did raise my glass, but my words would not be the ones he was waiting for. This was the beginning of my reveal, and I was ready. I raised my glass higher, letting my voice carry just enough to reach every corner of the room. Michael always says honesty is the foundation of success, I began, smiling warmly as though I were honoring him. The words made his chest puff with pride, and I saw him glance around, soaking in the admiration. Then I continued, my tone steady, deliberate. So tonight, let's honor him with his own words. I could feel the shift in the air, the way conversations stilled, eyes turning fully toward me. With a quiet click of the remote, the first image appeared on the screen I'd prepared. The screenshot of the message from that night at the restaurant. "Good night, love. Too bad you're not here with me." Gasps rippled instantly through the room, forks frozen in midair, wine glasses lowered slowly to the table. Michael's smile faltered, his hand gripping the edge of his chair. His parents stared, wide-eyed, while his colleagues leaned toward each other in hushed disbelief. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout could have been. I let the moment stretch, then added softly, "While he was here toasting with us, someone else was waiting for him to come to bed." My eyes never left Michael's, watching the color drain from his face, the mask he loved so much slipping away in front of everyone who mattered to him. The sting of betrayal, the years of quiet suspicion, all of it condensed into this one moment. And it was mine to command. I placed the papers on the table in front of him, crisp, final, undeniable. Michael's hand hovered above the divorce papers, his lips parting as though he might protest, but no words came. The silence of the room pressed down on him, leaving him stripped of excuses, stripped of control. His colleagues whispered in disbelief. His mother's eyes brimmed with tears, and his father shook his head slowly, as if he no longer recognized the man sitting at the table. Michael's empire of charm was crumbling in real time, and I didn't need to raise my voice to bring it down. I eased back into my chair, lifting my glass with deliberate calm. The wine tasted smooth, almost sweet, as I let the silence linger. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I felt steady, anchored, as if all the years of doubt had led to this exact moment of clarity. Michael stared at me, his face twisted between rage and desperation, but I didn't flinch. I had already won. The truth was out, and it was no longer mine to carry. It was his burden now. I set my glass down gently, folding my hands in my lap as if the matter were nothing more than dinner conversation. "To honesty," I said softly, my eyes meeting those of everyone at the table. A few guests raised their glasses hesitantly. Others simply stared. But the message was clear. The performance was over. Michael sat in silence, his world collapsing in front of an audience he'd once cherished. And I, at last, felt the weight lift from my shoulders, knowing this was only the beginning of his unraveling. The night ended without ceremony. Guests slipped out quietly, some avoiding eye contact, others whispering their condolences to me under their breath. Michael stood frozen in the dining room, the divorce papers still on the table like a scarlet letter, too heavy for him to touch. I didn't wait for him to recover. I gathered the empty glasses, my movements calm, deliberate, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside, though, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if the chains around me had finally fallen. The days that followed were crueler to him than anything I could have planned. His colleagues distanced themselves, whispers spreading faster than wildfire through the office. His parents stopped answering his calls. Friends who once admired him no longer returned his messages. And the woman he thought was waiting for him? She vanished the moment the truth became public, leaving him alone in the wreckage he had created. Every corner of his carefully built reputation had been scorched, and he had no one left to blame but himself. I, on the other hand, found strength in the silence. I met with my lawyer, signed papers with a steady hand, and began to picture a life where my worth wasn't measured by the shadow of a man who betrayed me. Each signature, each legal step, felt like a victory I never knew I needed. The woman who had once ignored her instincts was gone. In her place stood someone unshaken, someone who knew the cost of betrayal, but also the taste of freedom. And that freedom was only just beginning to bloom. Court dates came and went, each one another brick removed from the house Michael thought he'd built around me. I walked into those rooms with my head high, dressed in quiet elegance, never needing to raise my voice. My lawyer spoke for me, but my silence carried its own weight. Michael sat across the table, smaller somehow, his once confident posture reduced to slumped shoulders and a gaze that never met mine. I didn't revel in his ruin, but I won't lie, watching him unravel gave me a satisfaction I'd earned. Outside the courthouse, I'd sometimes pause and feel the sun on my face, letting it wash over me like a benediction. Friends reached out constantly, women who whispered that I'd done what they never could, that I had shown them strength they longed to find in themselves. Their words mattered more than Michael's downfall. For once, I wasn't defined by his actions. I was defined by my choice, to stand, to reveal, to leave. That realization steadied me in ways I never imagined. At home, I stripped away the remnants of our life together piece by piece. His clothes packed neatly in boxes, his photographs taken down from the walls, his cologne replaced by the scent of fresh flowers I bought for myself. Each change felt symbolic, like clearing space not just in my house, but in my heart. And every empty corner I created became an opening for something new, something that belonged solely to me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally living my own story. The final day in court was almost anticlimactic. Papers were signed, stamps pressed, and just like that, our marriage was no longer a binding chain around my life. I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp air, the city buzzing around me, and felt something I hadn't in years. Absolute freedom. My phone vibrated with messages, friends congratulating me, cheering for my strength, reminding me I wasn't alone. I smiled as I read them, my steps light, my shoulders unburdened. I thought back to that night at the restaurant, to the glow of chandeliers, the laughter, the illusion of perfection. One message had shattered it all. But instead of destroying me, it had rebuilt me. That betrayal had forced me to stop living in the shadow of a man who never deserved my trust. It had given me clarity, a clean slate, and the fire to claim my own life. Michael may have lost his empire, but I had gained something far more valuable: myself. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I caught my reflection in a glass door. The woman staring back at me was radiant, unshaken, alive. I tucked my phone back into my bag, lifted my chin, and kept walking, each step echoing with certainty. The chapter with Michael was closed. My story was mine again. And as I moved forward into the unknown, I carried with me one undeniable truth. One text exposed his lie, and one dinner ended his empire.
The blueprint spread across my desk told a story that numbers alone couldn't capture. Foster Architectural Group, the firm my father had built from nothing over 4 decades, was being systematically dismantled from within. Not through obvious destruction, but through subtle, calculated decisions that were slowly eroding our foundation. And I knew exactly who was responsible. My name is Maya Foster, and at 36, I found myself fighting to preserve not just a company, but a legacy that had shaped skylines across 3 continents. As I traced the declining project metrics and mysterious client departures, a knock interrupted my concentration. "The executive committee meeting has been moved up to 2 o'clock, said Lydia, my executive assistant, her expression carefully neutral. "Robert says it's urgent." Of course he did. My stepbrother had perfected the art of strategic timing. "Let me guess, this was just announced?" I asked, checking my watch, 11:23 m. "The notification went out 15 minutes ago," Lydia confirmed. "And the quarterly reports have been revised." Again. I nodded, unsurprised. "Thank you, Lydia. Would you make sure the conference room has enough chairs for all the partners, including those Robert might have overlooked?" After she left, I unlocked my desk drawer and removed a slim external hard drive. The repository of evidence I'd been compiling for months. What had started as minor inconsistencies in project management had evolved into a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Robert Mason, my stepbrother and chief operating officer, was orchestrating the controlled failure of Foster Architectural Group. My father, James Foster, had married Robert's mother when I was 20 and Robert 25. While I had grown up in the firm, spending summers filing blueprints and later earning my architectural degree specifically to join the family business, Robert came from the world of management consulting with his MBA and polished corporate vocabulary. When Dad died unexpectedly 3 years ago, he left us equal shares in the company but named me chief executive officer, a decision that Robert had never accepted despite his public displays of support. "Maya has the Foster vision," Dad had written in his succession letter to the partners. "Architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about creating spaces where human potential can flourish." She understands that in her bones. What Robert lacked in architectural vision, he compensated for with political skill. Over the past year, he had carefully cultivated relationships with our board members and key clients, positioning himself as the mature, business-minded leader, while subtly characterizing me as the impractical dreamer too focused on design excellence rather than financial performance. And now he was making his move. I pulled up the private email I'd received yesterday from Carlos Vega, our former IT director who had resigned 6 months ago, or rather had been pushed out after raising concerns about irregular access to our client database. Analysis complete, Carlos had written. Found evidence of systematic client communication manipulation. Someone has been altering your emails to key accounts. Details in the attached report. Be careful who sees this. My phone buzzed with a text from my stepsister Amara, Robert's biological sister, but my steadfast ally. Robert's called all the equity partners. Something about leadership concerns. "Are you ready?" I texted back. "As ready as I'll ever be. You?" "I've got the London conference call records. The partners need to hear them. Amara had joined the firm 5 years ago, bringing her expertise in sustainable design and urban planning. Unlike her brother, she had embraced the Foster philosophy and become an instrumental part of our most innovative projects. More importantly, she had noticed the same troubling patterns I had and helped me investigate. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing everything we'd uncovered. Projects mysteriously delayed, client communications altered, design specifications changed just enough to create problems but not enough to be immediately obvious as sabotage. Robert had been meticulous, always maintaining plausible deniability while ensuring that problems accumulated under my leadership. At 1:55 p.m., I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room. The tension was palpable as I entered. Our partners, 15 architects and designers who held ownership stakes in the firm, sat around the enormous reclaimed wood table my father had commissioned from a local artisan. Robert stood at the head of the table, my father's old position, looking every inch the confident executive in his tailored suit. "Maya, thank you for joining us," he said, the perfect picture of professional concern. "I know this meeting is unexpected, but circumstances have made it necessary." I took my seat, noting who met my eyes and who didn't. The division was already apparent, the old guard who had worked with my father versus the newer partners Robert had helped bring in. "As you all know," Robert continued, "Foster Architectural Group has faced unprecedented challenges over the past 18 months. Our project completion rates have declined by 22%. We've lost 7 major clients, including the Westfield development that would have anchored our fiscal year. Most concerning, our reputation for reliability, the cornerstone of my stepfather's business philosophy, has been seriously compromised." He gestured to the screen behind him, where graphs and charts displayed our downward trajectory in stark visual terms. Each data point had been carefully selected to create a narrative of failure. "I've prepared a comprehensive analysis," he continued, distributing folders to each partner. "The evidence points to a fundamental issue with our current leadership approach. Therefore, I'm formally proposing a restructuring of executive responsibilities, with myself assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer while Maya transitions to a position better aligned with her strengths, perhaps as Design Director." Several partners nodded, clearly having been briefed in advance. Others looked uncomfortable but not surprised. Robert had laid the groundwork thoroughly. Before we discussed Robert's proposal, I said calmly, "I'd like to share some information of my own." Robert's smile remained fixed. "Of course, Maya, though I think the performance metrics speak for themselves." "They certainly tell a story," I agreed, connecting my laptop to the display system. "But I'm not sure it's the complete story." The screen changed to show a different set of data, a complex timeline correlating project delays with specific operational decisions, all authorized by Robert as COO. Next came a series of email exchanges, original messages I had sent to clients alongside the altered versions they had actually received, with critical details changed in ways that ensured misunderstandings and frustrations. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Robert asked, his composure beginning to crack. "I'm not suggesting anything yet," I replied. "I'm presenting evidence. Carlos, would you join us, please?" The conference room door opened and Carlos Vega entered. Several partners looked startled. They had been told Carlos left to take a position with a tech company. "Mr. Vega has been conducting an independent forensic analysis of our communication systems," I explained. "Carlos, would you share what you found?" Carlos nodded, taking control of the presentation. "Over the past 14 months, I've documented systematic manipulation of internal project documentation and external client communications. Changes were made through an administrative access point using credentials assigned to Robert Mason. These weren't random glitches or misunderstandings. They were deliberate alterations designed to create problems while hiding their source." The room erupted in whispers. Robert stood abruptly. "This is absurd, a desperate attempt to shift blame for your own leadership failures. Carlos left months ago. Now he returns with some manufactured evidence." "I never wanted to leave," Carlos said quietly. "I was given a choice: resign with a generous severance package or face termination for performance issues that suddenly appeared in my file after I began investigating irregular system access." Before Robert could respond, the door opened again and Amara entered, accompanied by Lawrence Chen, our most important client, whose project had been among those mysteriously delayed. Lawrence has been kind enough to join us, Amara said, to clarify some communications regarding the Eastside Cultural Center project. Lawrence, a distinguished developer known for his integrity, addressed the partners directly. 3 months ago, I nearly terminated our relationship with Foster because of what appeared to be broken promises and missed deadlines. However, in a conversation with Amara last week, we discovered significant discrepancies between what Maya had apparently communicated to my team and what was actually happening with the project. He held up a folder. This contains the original design specifications approved by my team alongside the modified versions that were actually implemented, changes that created costly delays but were consistently attributed to misunderstandings on our part or miscommunications from Maya. Robert's face had lost all color. He can't possibly. I have one more piece of information to share, I said, silencing the room. I played an audio recording from 6 months earlier, conversation between Robert and Julian Barnes, CEO of our largest competitor, discussing acquisition opportunities once Foster Architectural Group's valuation had adjusted to a more realistic level. The recording ended, and I faced the partners directly. For the past year, Robert has been systematically undermining our projects, alienating our clients, and damaging our reputation, all while carefully building the narrative that I was the problem. His goal wasn't just to replace me as CEO, it was to devalue the entire firm to facilitate a below-market acquisition by Barnes Architectural. The silence in the room was absolute. This is slander, Robert finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction. I've dedicated years to this company, to positioning yourself to sell it, I finished for him. What you never understood is that Foster isn't just a business to be stripped and sold for parts. It's a legacy built on relationships, integrity, and the belief that architecture has the power to transform communities. I turned to address all the partners. My father trusted me with this company not because I'm his daughter, but because I understand that Foster Architectural Group has always been about more than profit margins and market share. It's about creating spaces that elevate the human experience, about building relationships that last generations, about doing work that matters. The vote that followed was decisive. Robert was removed from his position as COO and his employment terminated effective immediately. As security escorted him from the building, I watched from my office window, feeling no satisfaction, only resolve to repair the damage and rebuild what he had tried to destroy. The aftermath required both immediate crisis management and long-term healing. I spent hours with affected clients, personally reviewing project statuses and restoring relationships that had been damaged by Robert's manipulations. Carlos returned as our IT director with an expanded role in digital security. Amara stepped into the COO position, bringing her natural diplomacy and organizational skills to bear in restructuring our operations. Most challenging was addressing the cultural damage. Robert's sabotage had created an atmosphere of distrust and uncertainty. Teams that had once collaborated seamlessly now approached each other with caution, unsure who had been aligned with Robert's agenda. 2 weeks after Robert's departure, I called an all-staff meeting in our main design studio, the heart of our firm where concept sketches evolved into the buildings that defined our work. The past 18 months have been among the most challenging in our firm's history. I began looking out at the faces of our 200 employees. Not because of market conditions or ordinary business cycles, but because someone within our leadership team was actively working against our shared purpose. I paused, noting the mixture of anger, relief, and residual anxiety in their expressions. Robert's actions impacted all of you. Projects that should have succeeded faced artificial obstacles. Teams that should have been celebrated were questioned. The culture of trust my father worked so hard to build was deliberately undermined. Moving away from the podium, I walked among them, wanting this to feel like a conversation rather than a lecture. But here's what Robert failed to understand about Foster. We are not defined by any single person, not my father, not me, not anyone who tries to damage what we've built together. We are defined by our collective commitment to creating architecture that matters. I gestured to the project boards lining the walls, schools, hospitals, community centers, sustainable housing developments. These buildings aren't just structures, they're possibilities made physical. They're the schools where children discover their potential, the public spaces where communities come together, the sustainable developments that help heal our planet while housing our neighbors. Returning to the center of the room, I continued. Today we begin rebuilding not just our operations and our client relationships, but our culture of trust and purpose. For those who supported Robert, believing his narrative about my leadership, I understand. Good people can be misled by those skilled in manipulation. There will be no reprisals, no lingering suspicions. We move forward together. The tension in the room visibly eased with those words. For those who suspected something was wrong but didn't know where to turn, we're creating new channels for concerns to be raised safely. No one should ever fear consequences for speaking truth in this company. I smiled, feeling the energy in the room shift from apprehension to possibility. And for all of you who continue to do exceptional work despite the obstacles placed in your way, thank you. Your resilience is the true foundation of Foster Architectural Group. The weeks that followed brought a gradual restoration of what had been damaged. Projects that had been derailed were put back on track. Client relationships that had frayed were carefully mended. Most importantly, the spirit that had always defined Foster, the belief that architecture could be both excellent and meaningful, began to flourish again. 3 months after Robert's departure, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret Foster, my father's sister and a retired architect herself, appeared in my office doorway. "I heard there was some excitement around here," she said dryly, embracing me. "Thought I should come see how James's girl was handling it." We sat in the small seating area where my father had always preferred to have important conversations, believing that sitting behind a desk created unnecessary barriers. Dad would have seen through Robert immediately, I sighed. I should have trusted my instincts sooner. Margaret studied me thoughtfully. "Don't be so sure. Your father wasn't perfect, Maya. He believed in seeing the best in people, especially family. It's what made him such a good architect and such a trusting businessman." She reached into her bag and withdrew a worn leather journal. "James asked me to give you this if you ever faced a real test of leadership. I think nearly losing the firm to sabotage qualifies." I accepted the journal, recognizing my father's initials embossed on the cover. Inside, I found entries dating back to the firm's earliest days, challenges he had faced, mistakes he had made, lessons he had learned. And on the final page, a letter addressed to me. "My dear Maya, if Margaret has given you this journal, you're facing the kind of challenge that tests not just your professional abilities but your understanding of what Foster Architectural Group truly represents. Architecture, at its core, is an act of optimism. We design spaces not just for what is, but for what could be. We imagine better ways for people to live, work, learn, and connect. This optimism must extend to how we lead as well, believing in possibility even when faced with doubt or opposition. I've watched you grow from a curious child who built elaborate structures from sofa cushions into a thoughtful architect with both technical skill and humanistic vision. You understand that buildings are really about people, their needs, their aspirations, their potential. This understanding is what will guide you through whatever challenge you're facing now. Trust it. Lead from it. The Foster name on our firm has never been about family ownership. It's about fostering, nurturing, encouraging, and developing both the people who work with us and the communities we serve. This is your true inheritance, and I have complete faith in your stewardship of it. With love and confidence, Dad. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. Margaret squeezed my hand gently. "He saw this version of you long before you did," she said softly. "The leader who could face betrayal without becoming bitter, who could rebuild without compromising the firm's soul." 1 year to the day after uncovering Robert's sabotage, I stood in the center of our newest completed project. A community innovation center built on the site of an abandoned factory. Sunlight streamed through the carefully positioned skylights, illuminating the flexible workspaces, learning labs, and public gathering areas designed to serve a neighborhood in transition. Around me, Foster architects and designers led small groups of community members through the space, explaining how their input had shaped each aspect of the design. Children explored the interactive learning exhibits while local entrepreneurs examined the affordable office spaces that would incubate their businesses. Amara joined me, watching the activity with evident satisfaction. "This is what he couldn't understand," she said. "That success isn't just measured in billable hours and profit margins." No, I agreed. It's measured in spaces that serve their purpose beautifully and projects that strengthen communities, in work that honors both the past and the future. Later that evening, we gathered the entire firm for a celebration, not just of the successful project opening, but of the journey we had taken together over the past year. The venue was the central atrium of our office, transformed for the occasion with installations created by staff members representing their visions for the firm's future. A year ago, I addressed the assembled team. Someone tried to convince us that Foster Architectural Group was failing, that we needed to compromise our values to survive, that excellence and integrity were luxuries we couldn't afford in a competitive market. The room grew quiet, everyone remembering those difficult days. Instead, we recommitted to the principles that have always defined us. We didn't just survive, we thrived. Our project completion rate is up 34%. We've added 12 new clients who specifically sought us out for our design philosophy and collaborative approach. Most importantly, the buildings we've created this year are making a tangible difference in the communities they serve. I raise my glass to Foster Architectural Group, not just to the firm itself, but to what it represents. The belief that thoughtful design can elevate the human experience, that how we build is as important as what we build, and that our greatest achievements are always ahead of us. The response was enthusiastic and heartfelt. As conversations resumed and people circulated among the installations, I found myself beside one of our newest architects, a recent graduate who had joined us just after Robert's departure. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I was considering job offers, several firms had better starting salaries or more prestigious addresses. But during my interview here, something felt different. There was a sense of purpose, a connection between the work and why it matters." I smiled, recognizing in her words the essence of what my father had built and what I have fought to preserve. "That connection is everything," I told her. "It's what gets us through the challenging projects, the long hours, the inevitable setbacks. When you understand the why behind your work, the how becomes clearer." As the evening concluded and staff dispersed, I walked through our quiet office. On my father's old drafting table, which I had kept in the center of the design studio rather than hiding it away as a relic, sat a simple architectural model. It wasn't one of our professional projects, but rather something one of our interns had created. A concept for affordable intergenerational housing that addressed both the housing crisis and the epidemic of loneliness affecting both young adults and seniors. This was Foster's true legacy, not just buildings, but the cultivation of architects who saw design as a form of service, who understood that their work could shape not just skylines but lives. Robert had tried to reduce this legacy to balance sheets and billable hours, believing that was where true value resided. In doing so, he had fundamentally misunderstood what my father had built and what I had been entrusted to preserve, not just a successful firm, but a philosophy that recognized architecture's power to create spaces where human potential could flourish. The next morning, as I walked through the Innovation Center before its official public opening, an elderly community member approached me. "You're James Foster's daughter, aren't you?" he asked. "He designed the library where I've worked for 30 years. I nodded, touched by the personal connection. "He always said buildings should be both beautiful and useful," the man continued. "This place is both. He would be proud, not just of the building, but of how you built it." I thanked him, realizing that this was the greatest vindication of all, not just preserving my father's company, but extending his vision in ways that continued to serve people long after both the architect and the crisis had passed. And that, I reflected as sunlight filled the space we had created, was the most meaningful form of legacy. Not what you prevent from being destroyed, but what you enable to be built. "Your algorithm will never work in the real world," my brother declared to our entire family at Thanksgiving dinner, just 8 hours before I would sign the acquisition papers, making me the youngest self-made billionaire in healthcare technology. My pioneering predictive diagnosis system had just been purchased by Microsoft for $3.7 billion. But as far as my family knew, I was still a disappointment who had walked away from medical school to play with computers. I'm Amara Chaudhary, 32 years old, with 2 computer science degrees and an MBA that my traditional Indian American family considers vastly inferior to my brother Vikram's medical credentials. For the past 5 years, I've been building Prevenio, a healthcare AI startup that uses subtle physiological indicators to predict serious medical conditions months before conventional diagnostics. "The human body is too complex for algorithms to understand," Vikram continued, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. "Real medicine requires years of training and clinical experience, not coding shortcuts." Around our parents' dining table sat the familiar audience for this well-worn lecture. Mom and Dad, beaming with pride at their son, the cardiac surgeon. Vikram's wife, Priya, a pediatrician. My younger sister, Leela, finishing her residency, and my grandmother, who still asked when I would find a nice doctor to marry since I'd abandoned becoming one myself. No one mentioned that Vikram's hospital was facing a malpractice lawsuit for a misdiagnosis that my technology could have prevented. No one knew that major hospitals across 3 continents were already quietly using Prevenio's beta system, with early detection rates that outperform traditional methods by 62%. "How is your computer project going?" my father asked, clearly trying to include me in the conversation while carefully avoiding any suggestion that it might actually be successful. "It's going well," I replied neutrally, taking another bite of my mother's biryani. The confidentiality agreement in my laptop bag prohibited me from discussing the acquisition until the formal announcement tomorrow morning. "Just well," Vikram pressed, always ready to underscore my perceived underachievement. "Still working out of that incubator space downtown? How many employees do you have now?" 5, 6. "We've expanded a bit," I said, thinking of our sleek headquarters with its staff of 87 engineers, data scientists, and medical researchers. The building Vikram had never bothered to visit despite my invitations. "You know," my mother interjected with familiar concern, "Dr. Gupta's son has an opening at his healthcare management firm. Very stable, good benefits." I smiled politely. "Thanks, Mom, but I'm committed to Prevenio." "Committed to what exactly?" Vikram challenged. "Your algorithm looks at what? Heart rate, blood pressure, skin temperature. These are rudimentary indicators that tell us almost nothing definitive without proper medical context. You're selling false hope to patients and investors." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Prevenio's system incorporated over 347 physiological and behavioral indicators, most imperceptible to human observation. We trained our eye on anonymized data from millions of patient records, identifying patterns that preceded serious conditions long before they became clinically apparent. Actually, Leela spoke up unexpectedly. "I read an interesting paper about predictive healthcare AI in the New England Journal last month." She glanced at me. "Is that the kind of thing you're working on, Amara?" Before I could answer, Vikram interrupted. "Those systems are toys, barely past the research stage. Real medical professionals understand that diagnosis requires presence, intuition, a human touch." My phone vibrated with a text from Zach, my CTO. "Final acquisition papers ready for your signature. Legal says everything looks perfect. Would you excuse me?" I stood, leaving the familiar weight of disappointment at the table. "I need to make a quick call." In my childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest room but still lined with my academic awards, all seemingly diminished by my decision to leave medical school, I sat on the edge of the bed and called Zach. "How's the family dinner going?" he asked, knowing exactly what these gatherings were like after 5 years as my right-hand person. "The usual," I sighed. "My existence is a disappointment to medical science, apparently." "Well, Microsoft disagrees to the tune of $3.7 billion, Zach laughed. "Legal says the announcement is locked for 9 a.m. Eastern. You ready for this?" Was I ready? 5 years of work, of doubt, of being dismissed by my family and the medical establishment, culminating in vindication on a scale I'd hardly dared imagine. "More than ready," I replied. "I'll sign everything first thing tomorrow." When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had moved on to Leela's residency challenges. No one asked about my call. No one ever did. "Amara, will you be at the Medical Association dinner next month?" my mother asked as we cleared the plates. "Vikram is receiving an innovation award for his cardiac procedure techniques." The irony wasn't lost on me. My brother was being celebrated for innovation in a field that would be transformed by the technology he dismissed, my technology. "I might be traveling," I answered truthfully. After tomorrow's announcement, I had meetings scheduled across Europe with healthcare systems eager to implement Prevenio's platform. "Always too busy with that startup to support family," my mother sighed, not quite under her breath. Later, as I prepared to leave, Vikram cornered me near the door. "Listen, I'm saying this as your brother who cares about you," he began, his tone softening into what I recognized as his bedside manner. "These tech startups, they're unstable, 90% fail. You're brilliant, Amara, you always have been. It's not too late to come back to medicine, to do something meaningful. I looked at my brother, Harvard Medical School, youngest chief of cardiology in his hospital's history, our parents' unquestioned success story, and felt a moment of genuine pity. I am doing something meaningful, Vic, I said quietly. You might want to watch the business news tomorrow. His brow furrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Just a suggestion, I replied, kissing our mother goodbye and heading to my car. The drive to my downtown apartment gave me time to reflect on the journey that had led to this moment. The idea for Prevenio had come during my second year of medical school, when a classmate collapsed during an exam from a congenital heart condition that had gone undiagnosed despite regular checkups. Reviewing his case history later, I identified subtle indicators that had appeared in his routine vitals for months, patterns too easily dismissed as normal variations, but which collectively formed a recognizable signature of his condition. What if an algorithm could see what human doctors missed? What if we could teach a system to recognize the complex patterns that preceded serious medical events, identifying risk factors before they became emergencies? My medical professors had dismissed the concept. My family had been horrified when I left medical school to pursue it. Only my grandfather, a brilliant engineer who had immigrated to America with nothing, had understood. They laughed at me too, little one, he had told me before he passed away. Every innovation begins as an impossibility. His life insurance policy had provided my seed funding. I arrived home to find a delivery waiting, champagne from Rebecca Chin, the venture capitalist who had led our series of funding round when no one else would touch a medical ad company founded by a failed medical student. The note read simply, "To impossible things." Morning came with a flurry of texts and emails as the acquisition announcement hit the financial news. Mikey Rosa of T acquires AI he of carry SDRTU he PREVEIO for $3.7 billion splashed across Bloomberg, CNBC, and every major business outlet. My phone began ringing almost immediately. The first call wasn't from my family. It was from Dr. Patel, chief of medicine at my brother's hospital. Amara, I've just seen the news, he said, his voice warm with genuine enthusiasm. We've been following Prevenio's development closely. I wanted to personally congratulate you and to discuss how we might implement your system here. The irony of potentially deploying my technology in the very hospital where my brother practiced wasn't lost on me. I'd be happy to arrange a demonstration, Dr. Patel. Excellent. And perhaps you could present at our next innovation forum. Your brother Vikram speaks highly of your work. I nearly laughed aloud at the obvious lie. I'd be delighted. After finishing the call, I checked my messages. There were congratulations from colleagues, from investors, from former professors who had once questioned my decision. But nothing from my family. I wasn't surprised. They likely hadn't seen the news yet, still going about their morning routines, unaware that their failure daughter was now headline news. At 10:17 a.m., my mother finally called. Amara? Her voice sounded strange, almost hesitant. Your father is reading something on his iPad about Microsoft and a company called Prevenio. It says you sold your company for billions. Is this true? Yes, Mom. The announcement went out this morning. Silence then. Billions? With a bear? $3.7 billion to be exact. Another long pause. But why didn't you tell us? I tried, Mom. For 5 years, I tried to explain what I was building. No one wanted to hear it. In the background, I could hear my father asking questions, my mother's muffled responses. Then my father came on the line. Bida, this is extraordinary, he said, using his childhood nickname for me. We had no idea your work was so significant. I know, Dad. We're very proud of you, he added, his voice catching slightly. Were they proud, or just shocked? Did it matter? Thank you, I said. I have meetings all day, but maybe we can have dinner later this week. After finishing the call, I sat looking at my phone, expecting to hear from Vikram. Nothing came. The day passed in a blur of congratulatory calls, media inquiries, and meetings with the Microsoft integration team. By evening, I was mentally exhausted but too wired to sleep. I drove to Prevenio's headquarters, wanting to be in the space where we had built something that would change healthcare forever. Our lobby displayed a wall of testimonials, stories from early access patients whose conditions had been identified by our system months before traditional diagnostics would have caught them. Terminal illnesses caught early enough to treat. Life-threatening events prevented. Real people with families who would have more time together because of what we had built. I thought I might find you here. I turned to find Vikram standing awkwardly by the entrance, still in his hospital scrubs. How did you get in? I asked. Your security guard recognized me from your family photos. He gestured vaguely around the space. This is impressive, much bigger than I imagined. I said nothing, waiting. Dad showed me the acquisition news. He continued, moving further into the lobby. Then Dr. Patel called me into his office to discuss implementing your system at the hospital. He seemed surprised I hadn't told him my sister was the Amara Chowdhury. The irony clearly wasn't lost on him. I didn't know, he said finally, about any of this. The scale of what you've built, the impact it's having. You never asked. I replied simply. None of you did. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. Can you show me how it works? Your algorithm? For the next hour, I gave Vikram the demonstration I offered countless times over the years, each invitation declined or ignored. I showed him how our system integrated with hospital data systems, how it flagged subtle patterns, how it had already saved lives. This would have caught the Henderson case, he said quietly, referring to the malpractice suit his hospital was facing. We missed the indicators. All of them. That's why I built it, I replied. Not to replace doctors, but to see what humans can miss. To give patients more time. We stood side by side, looking at the wall of testimonials. I was wrong, Vikram finally said. Not just about your company, but about everything. I dismissed what you were doing because it didn't follow the path I understood. I couldn't see that you were creating a new path altogether. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Vikram, it was unprecedented. There's something else, he continued, pulling a medical journal from his bag. I want to show you a case I'm working on. A patient with unusual cardiac rhythms that don't match any known pattern. I've been wondering if your system if you might look at it with me. The gesture was small but significant. My brother, the cardiac surgeon, asking for my professional input, perhaps for the first time. I'd be happy to, I said. 2 days later, my family gathered again, this time at an upscale restaurant downtown. The dynamics had shifted palpably. My parents, still processing the magnitude of the acquisition, vacillated between beaming pride and lingering confusion about exactly what I had built. So Microsoft will use your algorithm in hospitals? My mother asked, clearly trying to understand. Yes, integrated with their healthcare systems, I explained patiently. It will help doctors identify potential health issues earlier, allowing for preventive interventions instead of just reactive treatments. Like that case you helped Vikram with, my father said, nodding as if he'd understood all along. Vikram, for his part, seemed subdued, still reconciling his previous dismissal of my work with the reality of what Pravinu had become. Amara's system flagged indicators I hadn't connected, he admitted. We're starting treatment protocols months earlier than we would have otherwise. I always knew you were doing important work, Rita, my mother declared, conveniently rewriting history, a brilliant doctor and a brilliant businesswoman. I never finished medical school, Mom, I reminded her gently. Details, she waved dismissively. Now about the Medical Association dinner next month. You must come. We'll make it a family celebration. Some things wouldn't change overnight. Perhaps they never would. But as dinner concluded and we stepped outside, Vikram pulled me aside. I've been thinking about what you said, about no one ever asking about your work, he began awkwardly. And you're right. We were all so caught up in our prescribed vision of success that we couldn't see you were redefining it. I nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words. I'd like to understand better, he continued. Not just the technology, but your journey. How you saw something none of us could see. For a moment, I was transported back to childhood. Vikram teaching me to ride a bike, helping with science projects, the brother who had once been my biggest champion before medical school became the measuring stick for success. I'd like that, I said. 6 months after the acquisition, I stood on stage at a major medical conference, presenting Pravinu's integration results from hospitals worldwide. In the front row sat my entire family, yes, even my grandmother, who now proudly told her friends that her granddaughter was revolutionizing medicine with computers. The data was irrefutable. Early detection rates improved by 71%. Preventable hospitalizations reduced by 43%. Lives extended, suffering prevented, healthcare resources optimized. As questions came from the audience, including from several doctors who had initially dismissed our approach, I caught Vikram's eye. He gave me a small nod, a gesture that contained both professional respect and personal reconciliation. Success, I had learned, wasn't just about financial exits or professional accolades. It wasn't even about proving doubters wrong. It was about staying true to a vision when no one else could see it, about creating something that genuinely improved people's lives. Later that evening, at a dinner celebrating Praveenya's expanding impact, my father raised his glass. To Amara, he said, his voice thick with emotion, who showed us that there are many paths to healing. I smiled, thinking of my grandfather and what he would make of this moment. Around the table sat my family, still imperfect in their understanding, but trying now in ways they hadn't before. Beside them were members of my team, the people who had believed in Praveenu from the beginning. Two families, so different, yet both essential parts of my journey. To impossible things, I replied, raising my glass to meet theirs, and to those who dare to make them possible.